Imagine stepping into a room lit only by candlelight. Fixed silence fills the air. Around you stand men whose faces are hidden beneath solemn expressions. You are blindfolded. A rope rests loosely around your neck. A sharp object presses lightly against your bare chest. Then someone asks a simple question. Do you enter here of your own free will? You answer yes. Moments later, you swear an oath that has fascinated and terrified the public for nearly 3 centuries. An oath that speaks of a throat cut from ear to ear, a tongue torn out by its roots, a body buried beneath the tide where the sea washes over it twice each day. It sounds like something from a medieval horror story. But these words, or versions of them, really appeared in historic Masonic initiation rituals used in many jurisdictions during the 18th and 19th centuries. The question is, why? Were these genuine threats? Or were they simply powerful symbols designed to ensure that a promise would never be broken? Tonight, we're opening one of history's most misunderstood doors, not to expose conspiracy theories, but to examine the documented history behind one of Freemasonry's most controversial traditions. Before Freemasonry became known as a worldwide fraternity, it was something much more practical. During the Middle Ages, Europe depended on highly skilled stonemasons to build cathedrals, castles, bridges, and monasteries that still stand today. Their knowledge was incredibly valuable. Without modern engineering manuals or patent laws, the techniques used to design towering Gothic cathedrals existed largely in the minds of experienced craftsmen. Guilds protected those techniques carefully. Young apprentices swore solemn promises not to reveal the methods of the trade to outsiders. Breaking that trust could damage the reputation and the livelihood of an entire guild. These men became known as operative masons because they actually worked with stone. But by the late 17th century, something unexpected began to happen. Men who had never carved a single block of limestone started asking to join. They weren't interested in architecture. They were drawn to the ideals: brotherhood, morality, charity, self-improvement. The working tools of the stonemason gradually became symbols for building a better human character rather than a cathedral. Historians call this transformation the birth of speculative Freemasonry, and it forms the foundation of the organization that continues to exist around the world today. As the fraternity evolved, its ceremonies became increasingly elaborate. The obligation taken by an entered apprentice, the first degree of Freemasonry, developed language that shocked many outsiders. Historical exposures published during the 18th and 19th centuries consistently describe a symbolic penalty in which the initiate declared that, should he knowingly betray the fraternity's lawful secrets, he would rather suffer his throat being cut, his tongue removed, and his body buried beneath the low water mark, where the tide flowed over it twice each day. The imagery was unforgettable. The location itself carried symbolic weight. To disappear beneath the endless rhythm of the sea suggested complete erasure from memory. Yet even in the earliest debates surrounding these rituals, Freemasons argued that no reasonable person was expected to interpret the language literally. The obligation was intended as moral theater, a dramatic reminder that honor and integrity should matter more than life itself. Still, not everyone accepted that explanation. And as Freemasonry spread across Europe and America, critics increasingly pointed to these frightening words as evidence that something darker was hidden behind the closed doors of the lodge. Little did they know, one man's decision to reveal those secrets would ignite a scandal so enormous that it nearly destroyed Freemasonry in the United States.
By the early 19th century, Freemasonry had become one of the most influential fraternal organizations in the United States. Judges belonged to lodges, military officers joined them, merchants, lawyers, physicians, even future presidents became Freemasons. To supporters, the fraternity represented charity, moral discipline, and mutual support. To critics, its secrecy raised an unsettling question. What exactly were its members promising behind closed doors? In 1826, one man decided the public deserved to know. His name was William Morgan. Morgan was a bricklayer living in western New York and, according to historical records, had become deeply disillusioned with Freemasonry. Claiming first-hand knowledge of its ceremonies, he announced that he intended to publish a book revealing the fraternity's ritual obligations, passwords, signs, and symbols.
The reaction was immediate. Before the book could appear, Morgan was arrested over a relatively minor debt, an arrest many historians consider suspicious, though the precise motives remain debated. After his release, witnesses reported that he was seized by a group of men and taken away in a carriage. That was the last time he was seen alive. No body was ever conclusively identified. No definitive account of his fate has ever been proven. Some believed he was murdered. Others argued he escaped and began a new life elsewhere. Nearly 2 centuries later, historians still cannot state with certainty what happened after that carriage disappeared into the night. But one fact is beyond dispute. The public believed Freemasons were responsible, and that belief changed American history. Newspapers seized on the story. Public meetings condemned the fraternity. Church leaders denounced secret societies. Entire communities turned against local lodges. Membership plummeted across many states. Some lodges closed their doors forever. The controversy grew so intense that it gave rise to something almost unprecedented in American politics: the Anti-Masonic Party. Founded in the aftermath of the Morgan Affair, it is widely regarded by historians as the first significant third party in the United States. Its platform centered on a single conviction: that secret organizations wielding private influence posed a danger to democratic society. For a time, openly identifying as a Freemason could seriously damage a politician's career. Even men who had never attended a lodge felt compelled to publicly distance themselves from the fraternity. Few organizations in modern history have experienced such a dramatic collapse in public trust over a single event. Ironically, the controversy did not arise because anyone claimed the ritual penalties had actually been carried out. There is no verified historical case of a Masonic lodge legally executing a member under the traditional obligation. Instead, the outrage came from the language itself. To many outsiders, the penalties sounded disturbingly real. Freemasons consistently responded that they were symbolic, part of a moral drama inherited from earlier traditions, rather than literal punishments. Whether the public accepted that explanation was another matter entirely. The story takes an unexpected turn in the 1840s. In Nauvoo, Illinois, Joseph Smith, founder of the Latter-day Saint movement, became a Freemason. Shortly afterward, he introduced the temple endowment ceremony within his growing religious community. Historians have long observed striking similarities between certain early temple penalties and the older Masonic obligations. References involving the throat, the chest, and the body appeared in both traditions, though interpreted within very different religious and symbolic contexts. Exactly how much was borrowed, adapted, or independently developed remains a subject of scholarly debate. What is far less controversial is what happened next. Over time, both traditions quietly moved away from these dramatic forms of expression. The graphic penalty language that had once been considered an essential part of solemn ritual gradually became a source of discomfort, even among believers themselves. And by the 20th century, change was no longer a question of if, it was only a question of when. Long before the 20th century, some Masonic leaders had already begun questioning whether such graphic language still served any meaningful purpose. When the two rival English Grand Lodges united in 1813 to form the United Grand Lodge of England, ritual revisions gradually began appearing in some jurisdictions. The obligations remained, but increasing emphasis was placed on their symbolic nature rather than any suggestion of literal punishment. Even so, the older wording survived in many lodges for generations. For some members, it represented an important historical tradition. For others, it had become an unnecessary obstacle, language that obscured Freemasonry's stated values of morality, charity, and personal growth. By the late 20th century, that debate reached its conclusion. In 1986, the United Grand Lodge of England formally removed the traditional physical penalty clauses from its ceremonies, replacing them with language focused on honor, integrity, and the consequences of violating one's obligations within the fraternity. Other Grand Lodges around the world followed their own paths. Some adopted similar reforms earlier, others did so later. And because Freemasonry has no single worldwide governing authority, ritual wording can still differ from one jurisdiction to another. That diversity explains why accounts of Masonic ceremonies sometimes appear to contradict one another. In many cases, both descriptions are historically accurate. They simply describe different places, different traditions, or different periods in time. One of the most persistent legends surrounding the old obligation concerns its unusual burial imagery. The oath describes burial beneath the low water mark, where the tide washes over the grave twice each day. Some historians and writers have suggested this echoes 18th-century maritime punishments, when executed pirates were sometimes displayed near tidal waters as a warning to others. The comparison is certainly striking, but no surviving evidence proves that the authors of the Masonic obligation deliberately borrowed this practice. It remains an interesting theory, not an established historical fact. Distinguishing documented evidence from compelling legend is essential when examining organizations surrounded by centuries of secrecy. So what do we actually know? We know that medieval craft guilds protected valuable knowledge through solemn promises. We know that speculative Freemasonry inherited and transformed those traditions into symbolic moral ceremonies. We know that some historic obligations contained vivid descriptions of physical penalties. We also know there is no verified historical evidence that those ceremonial penalties were ever carried out as actual punishments by a Masonic lodge. We know the disappearance of William Morgan ignited one of the greatest public crises in the fraternity's history. And we know that, over time, many jurisdictions chose to revise or remove the controversial language altogether. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't the oath itself. It's why words alone inspired so much fear. For nearly 3 centuries, generations of men repeated those ancient promises beneath candlelight. Some viewed them as sacred symbols. Others saw them as proof of dangerous secrecy. The same ritual produced loyalty in some, and suspicion in others. That tension has never completely disappeared. Even today, Freemasonry remains one of the world's most discussed and most misunderstood fraternal organizations. Its ceremonies continue to inspire curiosity because secrecy has a unique power. Whenever a door remains closed, people imagine what lies behind it. Sometimes the truth is less sensational than the legend. Sometimes the legend grows because the truth was never fully explained. And sometimes, history leaves just enough unanswered questions to keep us searching. If you enjoy exploring forgotten rituals, hidden traditions, and the darker chapters of history, where documented facts meet enduring mysteries, you found the right place. Subscribe to Chronicles of the Dark, because history doesn't disappear, it waits in the shadows.